Justin Trudeau is making you safer by going after guns held by, oh wait, hunters? Sport shooters? Yeah. Hi, I'm Brian Lilley, political columnist for the Toronto Sun. If you haven't heard, the Bill C-21, the latest gun control bill from Justin Trudeau's Liberal government, has passed. And while Trudeau will tell you this is all about making sure that the streets are safer and that criminals don't have guns, it's really about regulation for legal, licensed gun owners. Tracey Wilson is with the Canadian Centre for Firearms Rights, joins me now to talk about this because, Tracey, this is one that you fought pretty hard, and you were able to get expert testimony before MPs and senators and detailing how this would not work, and yet the bill still passed.
That's right, Brian. It's interesting, actually, that it not only passed, but it passed without amendments. And critics from both sides, experts of every kind, criticized this bill and how flawed it was.
So
So,
when you say both sides, what do you mean? The gun control advocates were also critical of the bill.
oh yeah, if you look back in the House of Commons testimony, all the most preeminent anti-violence women's groups objected to the changes to the existing red flag laws that will be implemented with C-21. They signed a great big letter. There was over 200 organizations on there. And yet they went ahead and passed the law with those red flag changes unamended because, of course, it was just more important to get that handgun ban in there against legal owners. So, forgive me for being cynical, but
Well, if you listen to the Trudeau Liberals, there were no red flag laws before Bill C-21, but there were. And for people that don't know, walk us through this. Red flag laws are, let's say, you know, uh, you and I are related, and I know you've got a bunch of guns, but I know you're having mental health issues and you might harm yourself, right? Like I can report you, that sort of thing.
absolutely. So there's a number of levels of red flag laws already in place in Canada before C-21. If you had a public safety concern about a licensed gun owner, there's a 1-800 hotline number that you could call and just say, I've got some concerns about this person. And of course, with the RCMP, it's an act first, question later type of response. And then, of course, all the way up to calling 911 if there's an immediate safety concern. And law enforcement testified in both the House of Commons committee and the Senate committee that the new changes to the red flag laws now put the onus on the victim to go to court to get an order to have the people's firearms seized. Whereas right now, the police can come to my home if there was a legitimate concern. And in fact, they'll figure out if it's legitimate later. They could come here right now and seize my firearms should I be reported for a safety concern. So as a woman who's got a little bit of experience with domestic violence, I almost find it appalling that we would put the onus on the victim to have to go to court and defend herself and apply for an order to have firearms taken.
That is an absolutely bizarre way to go about it. Now, so that's part of this bill, but the main part of this bill was what the ban on handguns. And
Yes.
is this also to codify the ban that the government announced by decree on May 1st, 2020, where they banned the AR-15 and a whole pile of other rifles that included a lot of hunting rifles and shotguns? Is that part of this as well?
Well, it's been such a long, convoluted journey with this bill. It absolutely codifies the handgun freeze. So those of us, there's over 1 million legally owned handguns across Canada. We're allowed to keep them. We're allowed to continue using them. We cannot acquire more, and we cannot sell the ones we have. And that may sound innocuous to most people listening, but I want you to think about what's going to happen upon the unfortunate event of my death. We're all going to grow old and die at some point. They're going to attend my home to my grieving widow and my children and take my legally acquired property that they know meant a lot to me, and destroy it without compensation. And to what end? I mean, I wish they would go after illicit guns and smuggled guns with this much vigor. As far as the long gun ban, back in May 2020, the government by OIC banned 1,500 models and variants of firearms, including the AR-15. They tried to add that in and codify it in legislation, with amendments G4 and G46, along with a huge list. I'm talking over 300 pages
that was a
of
massive
hunting
list.
rifles. Yes. And they eventually had to withdraw those amendments. They were too contentious. Indigenous groups were, for lack of a better word, up in arms about it. And they withdrew those. So the OIC still stands, that ban still stands, but it stands on its own. What they did sneak into C21 is sort of an evergreen ban. So going forward, any new semi-automatics that have a detachable magazine and are able to hold more than 5 cartridges will automatically be banned. So it only applies to new firearms coming on the market. And then, of course, lastly,
Okay,
they've
for people that don't know, they'll say, some people might say, well, that's good. I don't want a gun that can have a large magazine on the streets in Canada. But
right.
I mean, this essentially means if the magazine exists anywhere in the world,
Yes.
then this rifle is banned in Canada, even though large magazines are illegal and have been for decades, right?
That's right. So that's the caveat. Is the problem is Canada is not a very big manufacturer of firearms, and in fact, we're probably one of the smallest. So most firearms that we have here in Canada were designed in the United States or Turkey or other places around the world. Now, of course, to own them in Canada, you have to have a Canada compliant magazine. So they are pinned to a maximum of 5 rounds, meaning you can't put more than 5 rounds in the magazine, regardless of how many it was originally designed for. And removing that pin or being in possession of a magazine without a pin in it is already a criminal offense. So, and we just simply don't do it. It's been that way for decades. We just simply don't do it. It's a non-issue. So, this is going to create a problem because we won't be able to access new technology on the market for new and more modern firearms. So it's a way to limit the amount of guns that hunters and sport shooters will be able to access. And then the craziest part of all this is, even though those amendments that were withdrawn were extremely contentious and they were absolutely a hunting gun ban, regardless of what the Liberals or their anti-gun lobbies tell you, they have promised to resurrect CFAC, that's the Canadian Firearms Advisory Committee, which will be a panel of anti-gun lobbyists who will examine all of those guns that were in those lists that were removed, and see which ones they can ban. And they've agreed to do it again by OIC. So
OIC meaning Order in Council, that's the cabinet decree that never
yes.
has to be voted on in Parliament.
Yeah, it circumvents the entire democratic process. There's no vote, there's no debate. It's just done and it's instant. And it's very difficult because these are firearms that the technicians in the RCMP labs have said were safe and appropriate for civilian firearm use for decades, generations even.
Now,
And Liberals in suits disagree.
Tracey, I'm old enough to remember when the idea that politicians would have any say in which guns were banned was considered a really bad idea. The Harper government brought in changes to allow them to overrule the RCMP and their office that determines whether a gun is legal or needs to be banned, because the RCMP office was doing things like, what was the 22 they banned? It was a 22 that had been around forever, and they said it looks like an AK-47, so we're going to ban it, and it was a ridiculous move. So the Harper government said, no, like there has to be political oversight of this. They passed that. And Trudeau and the Liberals campaigned against that and said, we will make sure it is the experts who decide. It will not be politicians. And with the May 1st, 2020 ban and what you're talking about now, it's not RCMP experts. It's not firearms experts. It's a bunch of Liberals going to their gun control friends and saying, hey, take a look at this book. What do you want banned? Circle them.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly how it goes. In fact, it was funny. I was reading a tweet just the other day from 2014 from Justin Trudeau, where he legitimately said that. He said the decision about what should be banned should be left in the hands of police experts and not politicians. And then he completely went against his own word. But I mean, I think Canadians are getting used to that behavior from this government. But at the end of the day, the big travesty here is all of these resources, efforts, and time spent focused on hunters and sport shooters could have been better spent focused on actual crime, violence, and gun smuggling.
You know, gun smuggling is a huge issue at the border,
Mhm.
whether we're talking about people driving across the border, and it's everything from uh, guns being placed on vehicles unbeknownst to the owner by organized crime, guns being smuggled in personal vehicles by organized criminals, them being smuggled in on trucks by mail, as we just recently learned
Yes.
in a couple of media reports. That needs to be dealt with. That needs to be looked after because you know, the guns that are being sold on the streets are not coming from you and your friends.
That's right. And actually, in testimony during C21 in the House committee, Member of Parliament Blaine Calkins shared some information that talking about these scanners, that these drive-through scanners that you could put at the border. And even with the 119 ports of entry, it would still be cheaper to put one of those scanners at every single port of entry than it would to do these gun bans. And not only would you be able to detect firearms that are being smuggled, but other things like drugs, humans, the public safety benefit would be unmeasurable, really. I mean,
But the
it
government
would
won't do that.
absolutely save lives. But instead of doing that, they're going to come to homes like mine and take firearms away from
But
people like me.
but here's the thing. They don't know how to take your guns, right? So they've banned them.
Yeah,
And they've promised a gun buyback. And I know that term irks a lot of people because I'm always told, well, the government didn't own them in the first place, but that's what they call it, a buyback. Uh,
right.
they don't know how to do it. And you know, despite asking Canada Post, the military, the OPP, the RCMP, the Sûreté de Quebec, nobody's willing to help because they don't have the resources. So where are we in this gun buyback other than people registering funny names of fake companies on the government's
Yeah.
buy and sell website?
Well, it's been extended now until October of 2025, out past the next election, which, is a pretty blatant reminder that this is just a political tool and not necessarily a public safety tool. But yeah, this, like I've said right from the beginning, it is logistically impossible to do what they say they're going to do, to take over 500,000 guns from millions of people across a country the size of Canada. How are you going to pick them up? How are you going to keep them safe while you've got them? It's just we're in every corner of the country. It's literally impossible.
Well, my
And
favorite
I think
story was
they're
when
realizing
you told me that they had gone to Canada Post
that.
and you were describing you know, showing up at the Shoppers, which is where the Canada Post Office is near you, showing up at the Shoppers Drug Mart with a cart full of guns that you're going to hand over to the kid working for minimum wage behind the counter.
Oh yeah, like just think about that. I mean, I'm a suburban grandma here, but I've got 14 guns that were caught up in that May 2020 ban. I've got two AR-15s, and a number of other firearms, a 50 cal long range rifle and a bunch of other stuff. And just the thought of trying to jam all those, first of all, in my SUV, drive over to Canada Post, get a couple of shopping carts, load them up with all these guns, and go into some pimply faced teenager working the counter and hand him all these firearms for him to what, throw in the back with all the other ones. I mean, the ideas this government comes out with are it would be funny if it wasn't so tragically unsafe, right?
Unfortunately, tragedy is what we're getting with this government, not real public policy that will focus on public safety. Tracey, thanks so much for the time. Thanks for the update, and keep up the good fight.
Thanks, Brian. We'll see you soon.
All right, let me know what you think. Drop a comment down below, share this on social media, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.